Hello YouTube, this is William. Let's talk about batoning. This is a very sensitive subject, but bear with me a minute and let me give you my opinion on it. I did a video several years ago now. Just go back through and I'll try to put a link at the end of this video on it of proper technique in batoning, and I think it still applies for the most part today. But let me say this before I go much further, is I do not condone batoning at all, even any knife. Will certain knives handle it? Well, some will handle it better than others, let's put it that way. There's certain aspects that goes into the makeup of a knife and what happens to a knife when you're beating on it that needs to be discussed. Such as harmonics and vibrations and things like that I don't recall anybody ever talking about on YouTube. Now, before I get started on the harmonics and everything of a knife, let me first of all say that growing up and when I was taught how to use a knife on camp and everything else, my dad and the elders and everybody that I hung around with, none of them ever batoned a knife. So the first time I ever saw this happening was on YouTube. And please bear in mind, you only see them beating on a knife maybe one or two pieces. You don't see the longevity of that knife. A lot of times I get asked the question, will this knife baton or that knife baton, and so on and so forth. And the answer is yes. I mean, every knife to a certain extent will baton. Even folding knives will baton to a certain extent. I think the better question is, how long will it last batoning? I think that's the better question. Now, granted, thicker blades will last longer than thinner blades. Well, typically. That's not always the case, but typically. Now, the other thing that you see a lot is people saying that in order to get to dry wood or dry material, you have to baton the knife or baton the stick to get to it. For whatever reason, they don't want to carry an axe or a froe, those things that were designed to split wood with them. So they want a knife that's going to baton because they want to be able to fire. Now, let me show you what I've seen my elders do. And this is the WCBK that I've been, it's a prototype that I've been using and trying out for a week or two. What I have seen them do is take a piece of wood, it may be wet or whatever, and just start doing feathers. And if you start doing feathers, you're going to get to that same dry area that you would if you was beating on your knife and trying to split it. So I never understood the benefit or the reason or need to split a piece of wood to get to a dry surface, because that'll get you the same place. Now, I do think that there are certain aspects of where batoning a piece of wood is beneficial, and that's doing crafts, and maybe you want to do a fireboard or something like that. Then I would say, yeah, splitting a piece of wood would probably be needed. Now, I think that there are better tools for that, such as axes and froes, like I said. But if you had only a belt knife and you wanted to split that piece of wood, then for a craft, then use proper technique. And as I demonstrated in the video that's linked at the end of this one, the proper technique is for primary. You want to make sure that that knife is perpendicular, that it's standing straight up. It can't be leaning off to the side. Otherwise, when you hit that blade, you're putting side pressure on that blade. And the weakest part of that blade is this width. This width has a lot of strength, but it doesn't matter what it is, the thickness of the steel. This is the weakest part of that braid, is side pressure. Okay, so when you put side pressure on that blade, then you're hitting the weakest part of that blade. Now, a lot of people say, well, I need a knife that's going to be able to split wood in a survival situation. Well, typically, and let's be honest about the word survival, 99% of us will never be in a survival situation. The 1% of us that do get in a survival situation is because we were stupid. Let's be honest. We made several mistakes to get us to this point. You're going to be fatigued. You're going to be probably dehydrated, maybe a little hungry. You're not going to be thinking clearly because you're worried about your situation. So trying to baton a knife and making sure that all of those aspects and make sure it's perpendicular and all this other stuff is proper and correct, choosing the right wood is another major mistake I see. You need to make sure that the wood is straight grain and less knots as possible. All of those are going to combine in making that batoning task more of a rolling the dice situation, because most of the time things are going to fail when you need it most. So I don't think that you should baton at all in a critical survival, if you will, situation for those reasons. Now, the other thing that happens when you're batoning or hitting any type of steel or anything, you can even hit wood, it creates vibrations and the harmonics of that steel. And basically it's just waves. It's running that back and forth on that piece of steel. And the harder you hit, the faster those waves go. Really, all you need to do to split a piece of wood is just use gentle taps. Okay, it still has those vibrations, but it's not as drastic as just wailing on it. Okay, and the reason those harmonics and vibration is bad is it's going to find the weakest part of that blade and stop. If you're using this part of the knife, it's going to hit right here at the piece of wood and stop. If that's a weak part of the blade, it's going to fracture that edge at that point. Many times I see people with longer blades using it like this, and they're splitting the wood this way. So what you have is you have harmonics on this side of the blade, you have harmonics on this side of the blade. And this area right here is the weakest part because you have a very fine edge up against a 90-degree grind. So what happens is a microscopic fissure or crack happens at that edge. And over time, depending on how long it takes as to how you use your knife, but over time it may be 2 weeks from now, it may be an hour from that point, it may be a month from that point, it may be 6 months from that point, it may be a year. But eventually, the more you beat on that knife, cause those harmonics, it's going to work its way through that blade and it's going to fail. Okay? So harmonics is detrimental to a knife if you beat on it enough. It doesn't matter how thick the steel is. That's the reason an axe works so well, is because it doesn't have that 90-degree area on the edge to come up against to stop those harmonics. It just flows out the end of it, if you will. A furrow doesn't have that sharpened edge, or 90 degree. Well, it does have a 90 degree at one end, but it doesn't have that sharpened, real fine edge that a knife does. Okay, so those are designed to actually handle splitting and vibrations. A blade is really not designed to do that. A blade, for the most part, now there are exceptions to every rule, a blade is, for the most part, is designed to cut, to slice. It's not made to be splitting things apart and chopping and have vibrations. Now, machete, different steel, different makeup, a lot of different things. Was it designed to baton? Not really, because most of them are very thin. The basic gist that I want to get across is, yes, every knife will baton. How long it will last depends on several factors. As a maker, I can guarantee that the heat treat of this knife is because I've done it myself. I know what it is. I can guarantee that when I purchased this steel, they said it was 01 or they said it was AEBL. I don't know that every piece of material that went in to make up that steel was mixed and added properly. I don't know that. I do know that the grind was proper because I did the grind. So there's a lot of things that I have no control over as a knife maker that could possibly cause a problem in the future. Um, I can guarantee my knives. I can say if it ever fails that I'll replace it. But I also depend on the customer to use common sense when he goes about using the knife as well. And that's part of that is the education process. And as I learn things, I incorporate that into my craft and I try to educate as much as I can. Now, with that said, I have done, since I started exploring and learned about the harmonics, I have created or used something that the kukris use to help decrease the possibility of that fracture happening by creating a choil right there. So basically what happens is those harmonics go up against that and they don't hit that fine edge, it just runs off like it does on the axe. And it doesn't create a fissure or a crack at that point. So since doing that, I mean, we tested the SKs to failure, and that was where they failed at. Since doing that, we have not had any problems at all. Now, does that mean that they're perfect, bomb-proof, that you can do everything you want to them and they're not going to fail? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means it's better. Now you can go back there and look at the videos on this knife and see that, I mean, we torture tested this thing. So we know the quality of these knives. But again, every time you beat on a knife, you put it through some nasty stuff, you're rolling the dice. So just take it with a grain of salt and understand that a knife is a tool and tools break. You guys get in the backyard, whittle on a stick, whittle, don't beat. If you have to beat, then do it properly. And be sure to take a child with you, get the opportunity. And don't forget those Band-Aids and plenty of knives. We'll catch you again soon. Bye.